Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that subscribe button. Really does help our channel grow, our audience grow, and I really do appreciate it more than you know. So click that subscribe button. Appreciate your support. Now, here's the video that you came here for. What I want to do now is kind of look back, but also look ahead on the big story of the weekend, which was, of course, John Calipari going back to Rupp Arena with the Arkansas Razorbacks and beating the Kentucky Wildcats in his former arena, his team's former arena against his former team. They beat him 89-79 in what was obviously, it goes without saying, the signature win of the early John Calipari era at Arkansas, And so I bring it up because after the game, we talked a lot about it, what went right, all that good stuff. And then I think the conversation, we briefly touched on, can Arkansas make a run? And I think the one thing that I did say on Sunday, I said, listen, I'm not going to oversell it. I'm not saying that this team is going 10-0 in the final 10 games of the season. But if you can win at Kentucky, you can win just about any game left on your schedule. And any win in the SEC at this point is good because the computer metrics love this league because of what it did in the out of conference. And so we talked about it a little bit. But like I said, Monday was a little bit of a quieter day. And I thought it was interesting because I came across 2 or 3 very interesting things that basically, one, confirm exactly what I told you about 2.5 weeks ago. And 2, I think it really shows you that Arkansas being on the NCAA tournament bubble and potentially getting into the NCAA tournament, I know they're 13-8, but it is not as far-fetched as anyone could possibly imagine. And so let's get into some of the notes and analytics, because the analytics tell you Arkansas could very much play itself into tournament contention, okay? So first of all, let's go ahead and look at the simplest way to determine, is Arkansas a bubble team? Well, on Tuesday morning, as he does every week, a little guy called Joe Lunardi put out his most recent NCAA tournament projection, okay? We all know Joe Lunardi. He's great. He's actually been on the pod. He's awesome. Maybe I reach out to him, try to get him on the show. But I found it interesting that in his most recent projection, he has Arkansas in his next 4 out, okay? So what does next 4 out mean? Basically, essentially what it means is it's pretty simple. I think everybody knows, right? You have the group of 68 teams that is going to be in the NCAA tournament, the 68-team field. Then you have the first 4 out. Those are teams that are right on the cut line. Can they get over the hump? Then you have the next 4 out that, they're not in the tournament picture, but all it takes is 1 or 2 wins, and you can be right back in. And so I thought it was interesting. They're in the next 4 out. And I think this really, to me, speaks to something that we talked about a few weeks ago, okay? Because, listen, let me even backtrack, okay? So 2-3 weeks ago, we did a segment on one of the Sunday shows. I vividly remember. It was after Arkansas lost to fall to 0-3 in SEC play, okay? And I'm trying to remember who it would have even been against. They lost to Tennessee, then they lost to Ole Miss. I'm blanking on who that third team was. It was obviously some sort of Saturday game that I don't know why I can't. Oh, it was Florida. They lost to Florida. It was ugly. And they lose to Florida at Bud Walton. And if you remember, we did a segment because one of these advanced analytics websites kind of came out and basically said, this is the projection for each team in the SEC in terms of what a bubble picture would look like and how realistic it is that they could get an at-large berth. And if you remember, we talked about it. It was like Alabama was 99.7% that on January 12th or whatever day it was, they could get an at-large bid. Auburn was basically 100%. Kentucky was basically 100%. I think even Texas A&M was 99.2%. And so basically it had all these projections, and then it had Arkansas down at the bottom with it was 9 to 10% chance of getting an at-large bid. And so I don't want to bore people with too many details, but I do think it's interesting because we talked about this at the time. And I said, listen, I'm not going to sit here and lie and say that Arkansas is playing the best basketball that I've ever seen in my life. But the notion that they only have a 10% chance to get an at-large bid, I said, is absolutely ridiculous. And at the time, the logic was pretty simple. The logic was, well, wait a second now. They play in the SEC, which is a double-edged sword. There's a lot of really good teams. It's hard. Nobody, unless your name is Auburn or maybe Alabama, is going to go on a 4, 5, 6 game winning streak in this league. It's just not going to happen. Everybody's struggling. Tennessee's great one night, then they're terrible another. Florida's great one night, then they're terrible another. Kentucky, Ole Miss, whoever. But what we talked about was That is both bad news and good news. You're not going to go on a 9-game win streak. It's just not going to happen. But the counter to that is every single win you get is basically pretty good in the eyes of the computers. And then conversely, even when you lose, it isn't crippling in the eyes of the computers as well. And so to use a very simple example, look at a place like North Carolina, okay? North Carolina is in a tough spot because not only are they 13-10, they play in this awful ACC, and it's a double-edged sword opposite of Arkansas, is that North Carolina plays a game every time they win, unless it's against Duke or maybe at Clemson this week, it basically does nothing to improve their resume. I'm sorry, beating Boston College at home, beating Cal, beating Stanford. These are not wins that move the needle with the NCAA Tournament Selection Committee in the NCAA Tournament computers. Conversely, if you take any loss, it's terrible if you're North Carolina, but Arkansas is kind of in the opposite situation. And what we talked about specifically at the time was pretty straightforward. Is that if you actually looked at Arkansas's resume, I hate boring people with the quad 1, quad 2, quad 3 stuff here in January and early February, but it is kind of worth noting. You looked at Arkansas' resume at the time, and you look now at Arkansas's resume. It's actually really not that bad. The 13-8 record is not pretty. But this isn't a team in the Mountain West that's 2-6 in league play. This isn't a team in the A10 and the A-Sun and the whatever. Basically, if there's one league you could afford to be 2-6 as long as you sort of turn things around, it's the SEC. And if you look at Arkansas's resume, here's what's important to note. They clearly don't have a lot of great wins. But why it matters, they have no bad losses right now. Okay, that Oklahoma loss isn't great. It's right now a quad 2 loss. But at the same time, Oklahoma's playing great. They just won by 30 points against Vandy the other day. Oklahoma, they play Auburn tonight. I mean, that would certainly help Arkansas's resume. I don't think they're going to get the win. But Oklahoma, it's not a terrible loss, and every other loss is in quad 1. Those are great wins, or great losses, if such a thing exists. So there are no bad losses on the resume. And I think it's important to know there's no really bad losses, right? 0 quad 3, 0 quad 4 losses, which are just, they're losses that will kill your resume. There's a lot of teams that are on the bubble that do have those really, really bad losses that are going to sink their resumes all season long. You don't need to go far to find one, by the way. I'll give you a perfect example. Monday night, Pitt is an NCAA tournament bubble-ish type team. Well, they lose at home to Virginia, who's absolutely terrible. I think that's a quad 3, maybe a quad 4 loss. And that is the type of loss that is going to hinder their resume all season long. And that's a loss that could plummet them on Selection Sunday. And so you look at Arkansas, basically any win that they get going forward is really, really, really good. They have 10 regular season games left. And then really the only losses that could even be construed as sort of bad going forward with 10 games left, LSU at home, you got to win. South Carolina on the road, you got to win. Every other game, if you win it, it's great. And if you lose it, it is going to have no negative impact. So I never bought this notion that they were completely off the bubble, but at some point you got to win. And so that's where it kind of gets interesting because to me, of course, as I type this, I have not looked at the comments yet. I'm sure they're on fire. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people say, well, yeah, it's great that you can, but Calipari's not going to win these games. Calipari stinks. He's the worst coach that's ever walked the face of the earth. To which I say, not really. And it's not just about what happened on Saturday. It's not just about, 8 years ago when he had this player or that team or made a Final Four or whatever. But the truth is, analytically, and kind of you look at the numbers, he's actually been a pretty good coach as a college basketball coach the last couple years in February. We talked consistently. We talked that day that they lost to Florida. I said, listen, you just got to survive into February because Cal has actually been pretty good in the regular season in February into March. Now, again, I understand there's been tournament disappointments. We've talked about them enough. Oakland, St. Peter's, we know those losses, okay? There hasn't been enough success in the SEC tournament, which I think clearly frustrated Calipari's or Kentucky fans when Calipari was at Kentucky. But the fact is, in February, he's actually been pretty good. Producer Matt, pop up the tweet from Jackson Collier, who covers Arkansas for Rivals.com. I thought this was great from JC. I talk to JC all the time. I love him. He said, a lot gets made of Calipari's final years at Kentucky, but we've made it to February and Arkansas needs wins. How has Cal fared in February, even in his quote-unquote down years? 8-1 in 2020, 2019, 2020, 3-4 in 2021, 2020, 2021, 6-4 in the 2022 season, 5-2 in 2023, 5-3 in 2024, 1-0 in 2025. And so you do the math over the course of that period, he's 28-12 over the final month of the regular season, or when in February as the coach of Kentucky over the last 5 years, okay? But what I will also say is this. So 2019, 2020, great team, could have made the NCAA, could have made the Final Four. That was Tyrese Maxey, Emmanuel Quickley, okay? Let's take out 2021. 2021 was a weird year for everybody. That was the COVID bubble year. The whole season was in a bubble. No fans basically anywhere. If it was 10, 20% capacity, okay? That was a year, by the way. Kentucky missed the tournament, but so did Duke. It was the only first-round loss of Roy Williams' career. It was just a strange season. I go back to what I talked about at the time, but everybody was miserable that year, okay? So I'm not going to criticize Calipari, a team full of freshmen. Nobody wants to be. It was a miserable year for everybody. That was the year Baylor and Gonzaga played in the championship. I could tell you, Gonzaga was undefeated. I know people on that staff that were miserable, that were like, I can't do this. This is awful. The only reason we're having success is because we got a bunch of old guys that get it, but this is terrible. And so I'm not going to criticize Calipari for what he did in 2021. Producer Matt, pop that up again really quick, okay? So after 2021, 6-2, 5-2, and then last year 5-3. And you sit there and say, well, 5-3 wouldn't be good enough, this and that. Well, here's the interesting thing, because I actually did reach out to Jackson about this. He only referenced February games and not regular season games that were played in March. So we all know the regular season ends the first full weekend of March, sometimes a little bit later, and then conference tournament starts, NCAA tournament, whatever. And so I bring it up because, yes, Calipari, quote unquote, only went 5-3 last year in February. Well, guess what? They played 3 regular season games in March, and Kentucky went 3-0. Kentucky went 3-0 in March last year, including, by the way, it is worth noting, a win at Tennessee, which was the SEC regular season champion. They also, ironically, beat Arkansas at home, and they beat Vandy at home as well. But really, they went 3-0 last year. So really, if you go from February 1 till the end of the regular season, they were 8-3. And really, so again, if you look at just the last 3 years, that's 16-5 over the last 3. But if you include March regular season games, I know I'm getting in the weeds, but Cal actually went 6-1 in March regular season games as well. So 6-1 plus whatever it was, 16 and I think 7 is what I said. Well, guess what? That is a 22-8 record after February 1st over the last 3 seasons, the down years for Calipari. 22-8 in February and March in a very tough SEC is not a bad record. And I'll tell you what, obviously I'm not great at math, but that comes out to about a 66% win percentage. I hate to spoil it for all the Calipari haters. If Arkansas goes wins 66% of its games at this season from here on forward, they're going to make the NCAA tournament. Okay, so right now, Arkansas, as I said, 13-8 right now in the regular season. Not great, a lot of work to do. I'm not saying they're going to go on a run, but the counter to that is that if they win 66% of their games, they got 10 games left in the regular season. They've played 21 games. They finished with 31. If they go 6-4 over their final 10 games, which is about 66%, I'm even going down a little bit, that is going to be a 19-12 regular season record. In the SEC, where you're not going to have any bad losses and several quad 1 wins, that is going to get them in the NCAA tournament. Now, it might be a 9 seed, it might be a 10 seed, it might be an 11 seed based on who they lose to and who they beat. And that is under the assumption that Cal only stays at the level that he has been at the last 3 years in February and March. That also doesn't factor in, by the way, what if he wins a game or 2 in the SEC tournament? So listen, I'm not going to go on and on because the bottom line is it still does matter that you got to keep winning games. And I don't want to overreact after one game. It is just 1 loss, 1 win against Kentucky. And if you lose to Texas on Wednesday, it starts this whole cycle over again of, it was a one-off deal. It was blah, 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 blah. It was this and that. But I will say the history tells us, and I've said this all along. I've said, listen, you can criticize Cal for the NCAA tournament struggles during his time at Kentucky those last 2 or 3 years. But the regular seasons have been great. That's what John Neighbors said on this show last week. He said, we thought we were getting to Cal that would go 13-5 in the SEC. That's clearly not in play. But I'm just here to tell you, there's winnable games left on this schedule. Texas is a really good team. I don't want to dismiss what Texas does, But people have gone into Texas and won there this season. You go on and on down the list. Obviously, you got some tough ones ahead. And listen, I'm not going to say you're going to beat Alabama next week. I'm not going to say you're going to beat Auburn later. But South Carolina is still on the schedule. Vandy on the schedule. Texas A&M, LSU. These are not games that you cannot win. And so I don't want to put the cart before the horse. I'm just here to tell you 6-4 over your final 10 does not sound great, but it would be good enough for John Calipari and Arkansas to get in the NCAA tournament. I'm not saying it will happen, but I do think it possibly could.